So we still keep a heavy bag out on the porch. I invite people to come have brisket on the porch. They always see the heavy bag and think, what's that for? I'm like, contract negotiations and code that won't compile.
Hi, everyone. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a moment to give a shout out to my amazing Supercast subscribers. Your continued support means the world to me. As a Supercast member, you get exclusive access to the unfiltered, ad-free video versions of our Health Unchained interviews. Raw, real, and packed with insights. You're not just supporting the show, you're fueling the conversations at the cutting edge of healthcare and blockchain innovation. So thank you for being a vital part of this journey. If you're interested in joining, you can learn more about Supercast in the episode description.
Hi, I'm your host, Ray Dogum, and welcome to Health Unchained. On this show, I will be speaking with healthcare entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and executives who are using blockchain technologies to revolutionize healthcare. These innovators are building the distributed infrastructure and diverse communities required for a trusted, secure, and decentralized healthcare ecosystem. Enjoy the show.
What is blockchain?
Was ist Blockchain?
What is blockchain?
The doctor will see you now.
Remember, the Health Unchained podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and we are not providing any sort of legal, financial, or medical advice. Please do your own research and due diligence before making any important decisions related to these matters. And now, please enjoy episode 124 of Health Unchained.
Welcome to the Health Unchained podcast. Today's guests, David Stefanich, Nina Kilbride, and Dr. Sarin Movsisyan will be joining us from CureLedger. David Stefanich was on the podcast 5 years ago in 2020. You can check that out in episode 73, when he and his co-founder, Jason Cross, shared their journey of building Rymedi, one of the most successful blockchain-based healthcare companies today. Their software was fundamental for Clemson University's COVID-19 surveillance testing program, and they've grown dramatically since then. However, today we will be talking about David's new project called CureLedger, which is set to transform the DeSci landscape. CureLedger team, thanks again for joining me today and taking the time out of your busy day. First of all, how's it going? Maybe we can get started with some intros from each of you. We can get started maybe with David, then Nina, and then Dr. Movsisyan.
Yeah, perfect, Ray. Hey, Ray, it's always great to be on the show. It's always great to keep you posted on what's going on in the world. It's been an exciting year and a half, 2 years, as we've been building out the layer one protocol, which has been the underpinning of Rymedi for the entire duration of the project, and some of the expansion we've been doing around the globe. Myself, being a software engineer in the life science industry for a large part of my career, along with Dr. Cross, my co-founder, it was really amazing how we could take technology and solve the real problems that are impacting lives and negatively impacting patient experience out in market. And to see we're turning that corner to a point where a protocol like CureLedger can actually extend beyond just the Rymedi footprint, but also across the industry in totality. So it's super great to be here. We're all in the same time zone for once, which is always nice. And that's really great. And get the opportunity to introduce my co-founder, Nina Kilbride, on the CureLedger side. I'll hand it off to you, Nina.
Hi, thanks, Ray, David, and Suren. I'm Nina Kilbride. I have, more than 20 years experience as a commercial litigation attorney in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, mostly around financial services, commercial services, and the insurance and risk management of things around that. In about 2015, I got the aha that in the future, there would be this time when AI was really a meaningful player in legal services, and that it was going to need verifiable data in which to work in. I also live in Research Triangle Park, where a lot of pharma and biotech research and development occurs. This is one of the bread and butter industries of our market. So it was real clear to me how Web3, in the way that Rymedi has built it out, was going to impact clinical research and development of pharmaceuticals around here. I'm also a rare disease mom. Long story short, I started teaching myself to code Web3 10 years ago, back when Solidity was still in rapid development. I'm now a full stack Web3 developer. And all of the financial market infrastructure and risk market infrastructure tools that we've built out, we are able to use to support distribution of Rymedi's solution out into a broader marketplace, so we can get expansion of innovation and breaking down of the silos that have so far hampered all of the medical innovation impacting people as well as it could.
Thank you, Ray, for having us today. Briefly about myself, I was in tech and marketing for the past 15 years, working with prominent healthcare and life science businesses like DataArt. They have 7,000 plus employees in 30 locations, including Europe, Middle East, US, and Americas. So there I was senior marketing manager and senior business development as well, like working with New York office with co-founders. So I was also advising a few AI and healthcare, and also with some kind of a calories burn blockchain type of solutions as well, applications mostly. I'm really excited to recently join Rymedi and CureLedger team, and we are about to revolutionize, I think, this landscape and help the humanity for the better health and kind of overall society can gain from our kind of solutions. So really exciting times ahead. Thank you for having us, Ray.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks for the background. It is exciting times. And, thinking about your backgrounds, healthcare, data, legal background, what do you think is it about blockchain and Web3 technologies that really is so transformative in the healthcare space? Like, why are you doing this? Obviously, it's risky because a lot of people have doubts about this blockchain thing. So what insights maybe have you gathered during your career trajectories that gave you that aha moment?
Yeah, I'm going to put on my traditional conservative life science industry hat for the next couple minutes. In our world, it's risk adverse, right? But you have interesting challenges out there. And we really learned with the Warp Speed project post-COVID, when they're accelerating delivery of vaccines, that one, the model can work. And the trick is there's two simple things we try to do. One is, how do we handle multi-jurisdictional compliance? For folks on listening to the podcast don't understand that statement, it may be sponsored in the US, which is HIPAA, but typically they're executed where the ethnicities are reflective of the clinical trial. So maybe it's Ireland, maybe it's New Zealand, maybe it's Eastern Europe, which all have different jurisdictions. How do you handle one data acquisition approach that can handle multiple modality? That was the protocol piece, because the protocol allowed for a framework of different control matrices to be solidified depending on where the individual resides at point of participation. Step two was, how do I have a universal date timestamp that all parties will trust that I don't control? What are we trying to enable and what are we trying to prevent? We want to make sure we're enabling that multi-jurisdictional execution of accelerated health and innovation development. We're trying to prevent the lack of trust and the fear that people hear about in the news related to some companies on the West Coast and others, which make them want to pull back versus participate. In the life science world, if you can take the guardrails of a conservative industry, but sprinkle innovation in something they're comfortable with, then they can adopt. And that has been the backbone of what Dr. Cross and I have done for the last 6 years. The contributing side of the data collection has its own challenges, and that's what I'm describing. What I'm going to do is hand over to Nina, because then how do you really have a marketplace if people aren't consuming the multi-jurisdictional data and the real-world evidence that we're producing? That's where Nina's expertise is second to none on the legal constraints of using that multi-party data. Nina, I'll hand that over to you.
What blockchain adds to this marketplace, which I'll just generically call the verifiable health data marketplace, it already exists as a vertical, $7.5 billion and growing 9 or 10% a year. What blockchain and Web3 add to that are portability in a way that is outside the silos. It's parametric, it's based on permission and rule set secured scripts. Second is reusability. We've had the law update such that people have some ways to reuse data, but they don't have a marketplace in which to distribute that data. The marketplace has to be as verifiable as the data and the parties selling it. And so that's what our infrastructure provides. The third is, when we get to scalability of the services of that the marketplaces deliver, if you can imagine in a world where AI agents are proliferating as researchers, purchasers of data, and as producers and potentially vendors of data, we need a way to validate that information in as close to real time and an automated script way as possible. And that's where smart contracts come in, and we need the blockchain that God's timestamp Dave talked about that gives us the ability to know who did what, when, and where, a verifiable proof stream.
Fascinating. That makes a lot of sense. I guess one question I have when we think about CureLedger is why focus on the difficult task of building an L1 infrastructure specifically around healthcare's unique industry parameters? And why not build a layer 2 and then rely on the L1s that exist to secure the network?
Right there, that's a good point, because there's certain unique attributes. Part of what we did in the Rymedi world when we were building out the CureLedger architecture was we were able to take 3 L1s actually and bind them together, which gives the underpinning of what the compliance layer is. And real quickly, one L1 handles the identity, the other L1 handles the transaction. I'm getting a test done. The third is a join of the 2 transaction keys. The only way to re-identify the transactions or the individual is their permission third layer. So having one token that can operate across 3 L1s, it's the unique architecture of the L1 CureLedger backbone that enables data sharing, the backbone of the enablement of the multiple mobility on the marketplace, and the compliance aspects we need. And we've extended a bit of the EVM. So think of it as a compliance service that someone can consume, remove the complexities, make the ability to do business simple by following the guidelines of the marketplace SDK, attach your product, and then you can actually expand what your current business model is. And that's why we had to do our own L1 built on a subnet avalanche derivative that's very, very specific to our industry, because I picked the most confusing, complex regulatory framework that I could think of on top of PCI compliance or Sarbanes-Oxley for all these jurisdictions. And that first data structure was the key that we were able to prove out over the last 4.5 years. And then it was nice because in that conservative market that I mentioned earlier, Ray, we actually have some patents issued. And its patents are not meant to be barriers to entry, but make the people in a conservative industry feel comfortable. It's all about being within something they understand and consuming that innovation. So that's why we brought something incredibly unique to the marketplace within that umbrella that we call life sciences.
And then the other thing I would add is that we have enough unique features that are going to enhance the operation of any project in any blockchain. It became more reasonable to provide our own L1 with endpoints and integrations and be interoperable with the rest of the blockchains. No one had really configured themselves specifically for the needs of the healthcare industry in quite this way, so we can distribute to the rest of the chains instead of being a single application layer.
Very interesting. We did get into some heavy detail into some of the architecture of CureLedger, but maybe let's take a step back and talk about what is actually CureLedger. What is it trying to do? What is the problem maybe that is trying to solve? Who is it solving it for? I think that would be good for the audience to understand. And then we can kind of dive in again into the details about how it works and some of the benefits and risks potentially.
Sure. Nina, you want to start on that one? Then you and Suren can pick up. And
sure. As Dave described, the healthcare industry has a lot of high-risk guardrails and has developed a lot of silos in which people feel safe and comfortable doing business. Those silos have hardened into a multi-billion-dollar industry that takes years and billions of dollars to get a drug or technological innovation through due diligence of clinical trials. At the end of that, there's a real good chance, of failure of the project, that happens. But on top of that, there's a real good chance that all that work and those billions of dollars spent they're going to be wasted. We might not even get to reuse that data. Now, the law has recently been changed that enables us to reuse that data in some way. However, the frameworks to distribute that data so that it can be reused creatively don't exist. That is the problem CureLedger exists to solve. We're taking these rigid siloed compliance processes that work well to be automated and turned into parametric smart contract processes. It's just quite disruptive to do so. So moving into this Web3 paradigm, where verifiable computing processes, verifiable data processes, and the ability to collaborate quickly and efficiently are the norm. This is the way we do things. DeSci has begun to set its sights on solving scientific problems in this verifiable proof structure that we've hardened out with all sorts of interesting financial projects. But those projects end up creating verifiable proof for whether structures and mechanisms actually work in a marketplace. Putting it all together, it solves the problem for access to research and development for people who could not participate. It solves the problem of distribution of hard to distribute products and services. For example, one of the things that Rymedi software has enabled is the ability to build pharmaceuticals in real time in sub-Saharan Africa, which solves a huge problem. That ability really didn't exist with existing supply chains in terms of both the molecules and the money. Once we add in blockchain structures, we can begin to build in verifiable processes so that you can then manufacture and distribute those products. In the short term, the people who need our technology are these hundreds or thousands of DeSci research projects. I'm talking to a lot of them. They might be startups. They might be researchers at a clinical university like Duke or UNC or Clemson. They want to know, how do they take this idea they have and take it into the research and development world so they can get it peer reviewed? And then how do they take it to market? And so we help them solve that problem as well.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and for folks on the podcast, we use a lot of jargon and terms. The way I like to think about why we chose Web3 and why we chose what we are doing. And in the history, we've had folks that were technologists that were looking for an industry, okay? And sometimes that's a hard sell. Because Dr. Cross and I, and Nina with our background, and Suren, we were in an industry that had a problem. And that is multiple modality data sharing and those silos that Nina was referring to. Then we found a technology that solved the problem. We found a great technology to apply to it as we got those early proof points in Mongolia and Australia and across the US. We're having this aha moment. So the proof points of using the technology to identify illness, treat illness, verify the treatments are correct that they're getting, but ultimately going back as a population management and saying, wait, wellness was achieved, which is that core value and that core mission that Dr. Cross and I did earlier, which resonates well with some of the DAOs and some of the research we're talking to, Sava over at Good Pharma. Right? People are passion driven about accelerating an impact to population. You know, by the grace of hard work and a really amazing team on this call, we're able to actually help them accelerate, just like Warp Speed Project did post-COVID, delivering a vaccine.
Amazing. I think the fact that we should be sharing this data amongst pharma companies, individuals, health systems, I think there's this understanding or this traditional sense that these pharma companies are spending a lot of money investing in this research, preclinical and clinical especially, and they don't want to just give that information or data away for free. I think that's one of the potential issues. Like, they're spending a lot of time, resources, and why should they give that away for free? That's part of their competitive edge. How do you settle these competitive forces within the industry? I think that's something that's important to traditional drug developers. Yeah. And I think DeSci people innately understand that they should be sharing it, but you want to kind of like talk to me about that?
Yeah, let's talk about the study itself, and then I'm going to turn it over to Suren and Nina to talk about the incentive mechanisms because there's two sides to the equation. One of the things we've learned, even with our client base today, is if say I'm doing a research project and it's a Hep C study in Australia, they do amazing research, but they don't actually understand that maybe another client's doing a Hep C study in another part of the world, or maybe there's another Hep C study. So the aggregation of multiple modality done in a clinical framework, that's an innovative business model. Handled in the CureLedger side, we use meta tags. So we protect the data in the door a little bit to that valuable data behind. So that's part one. Part two is, and sometimes the industry doesn't understand it, when clinical trials are done, you don't always know who owns the data because at times people release to participate in a clinical trial. Maybe it's the clinical trial company who owns the data. Maybe it's the person. Maybe it's the university. So data ownership and provenance over the life cycle is key. So in the CureLedger world, we've been very careful to say the origination, that genesis moment of that data element. It could be something as simple as your zip code all the way to the result of an A1C panel you have. We treat every data element with sovereignty from its genesis moment. And here's the intriguing part that we get excited about. A data set about Ray today may be worth X, but the data set of Ray over his lifetime becomes logarithmically more valuable. So it isn't the value of your data day one, it's the aggregation between multiple modalities and the genealogy of the achievement of the clinical study, the delivery of the API, and the ultimate goal of ensuring that we're pushing healthcare costs down by the achievement of wellness. So if you start thinking about that modality aspect, it doesn't turn into this is mine, but this becomes multiplicable impact of 3 or 4 of these. It's 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 7. That's the game. Now I'll turn it over to Nina on some of those aspects.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is really interesting because you could imagine a new system where you're investing your healthcare data on a yearly basis and over time that's growing. That's better than Social Security in a way because there's this like growing the pie aspect of it instead of just cutting the pie up. I think that's really interesting and makes a lot of sense. Nina, go ahead.
Right. So getting back to the initial question, which does have to do with ownership and sovereignty, because while Dave is right, the result of the entire system implemented is a win-win for everyone. In Web3, we're also a little bit wary if we don't have a better distribution of incentives to ecosystem participants. That's where data sovereignty, I think, becomes an issue that people will begin to talk about more over the coming years as data de-identified and distributable becomes a growth market. If you can't re-identify that data, then those of us who contributed the data, it's de-identified to protect our privacy, right? But if it's de-identified forever, how can our data actually be correlated enough to help us? There are a lot of ways that we're probably going to be reevaluating patient data sovereignty as more innovative DeSci projects get the opportunity to put proofs of concept into the world that can explore some of the models that have been suggested by big NGOs, FDA, folks like that. There are answers. These aren't necessarily going lawless. What we're talking about is actually leaning into regulatory and legal improvements that have already been recommended. Just need to put them into play in the market.
Ray, if you allow me to add, so what I wanted to add to Nina's point is that basically in the Web3 environment, we're also, just like she mentioned, we're providing benefits in terms of incentives for all those healthcare ecosystem players, right? So for example, just for the a bit of a, let's call it, I call myself as well dummy users, like whoever, because different audience kind of is watching us. So just with real examples, like imagine Ray is contributing data, right? Or Suren is participating in clinical trials, or Dave is sharing health insights. So all of these kind of is contributing to the pie that you just mentioned. So that I think it becomes a valuable also Web 2 plus Web 3 ecosystem. That's what also we are trying to do in addition to what my colleagues just mentioned. So yeah, I just wanted to bring these examples to the audience. Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning that. I think it's important to clarify. And for anyone
What?
listening, I just want to say there is a 20-page white paper on CureLedger.com. You should check that out for more details. We're not going to be able to cover every single thing or every single sort of use case here on the episode, but there's a lot of good information in the white paper I encourage you all to check out. I think you had something you wanted to add? Or...
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I didn't come across as saying that like this is like a us or them problem we've got with data sovereignty. I think we've got an unexplored value pool that will begin to peel the onion use case by use case until we've got a critical mass and comfort that de-identified but situationally re-identifiable systems are actually going to be enhanced by data sovereignty by the person at the bottom of the food chain, the person who gave the blood or whatever. Because at to Dave's point, there's also often the number of people who might have touched that data during the course of its data life cycle. But at the end of the day, the one party we know that we can point to that should have some say about that would be the patient. But in order to protect them right now, they're kind of cut off.
I feel like the patients have always been sort of cut off from the broader system, and we kind of treat them as less significant than they really are. I mean, there would be no healthcare data without healthcare patients, obviously. So we need to recognize that and give the value back to them, especially rare disease patients, as you specifically know very well.
You touched on something that maybe the audience isn't aware of, but the parents of rare disease children that have working groups on social media is the number one place where people are found to participate in clinical trials, because having a heartfelt passion to a state that's existing in their own home, and Nina's an incredibly brave individual to share her story and some of the research and what's going on, because it's the personalization. And you can talk, there's life sciences and all these medical records and all these things. There are many tenets inside of that umbrella that touch a human life, can be done with just a little innovation, done within the constraints that exist in the regulatory framework. If you really think about regulation, it wasn't built to be a barrier. It was built to ensure equitable health care. It's been morphed over time, shame on us, but bringing back to its regulatory intent to ensure that these activities can occur and being able to apply a technology that fosters these ecosystems. People are hungry for innovation in a better way. Why not just provide, and then people can choose to participate, not participate. The traction that we're getting in market, and we've got some fun stuff coming up here in the next 60, 90 days that we're going to be able to bring to market, but the demand is out there for a change. Right? It's innovative people that are not looking at breaking down the barriers of the past, but working within those so people feel comfortable. Because it's all about, Malcolm Gladwell's thought of instantaneous cognitive recognition. Does this feel okay? And that happens because you're within constraints of what perceived risk is. And it's always important to realize it's always back to that human element. Dr. Cross and I met his Medicine for All program with the Gates Foundation in a hallway. That's how we started this journey. And it was all based on making that change, because we can, and as participants in this entire environment we live in, it's our responsibility to participate and help out people and bring innovation to them. So just want to put a frame around what Nina was sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, these regulations have been put in place to help patients and help make sure everything is safe and there's no surprises at the end of the day. But it's morphed over time. And now, do you think that given all the rage around DeSci and decentralized health, Web3 systems, do you think there's policy change coming down the pike soon? Like, I'm not seeing any of that will help bring CureLedger to the forefront, or maybe even, find ways to build policies that benefits patients, let them incentivize patients to own their own data, because I think that's something people want. I think patients want to own their own data, be able to interoperate with other health systems, and not struggle to find their medical records all the time. What do you guys think?
I was at an event, healthcare blockchain event, where the lobbyists talked about the legislative agenda around privacy legislation and creating upgrades to the healthcare system. Patient data sovereignty wasn't discussed at all. However, that might have been a function of the room we were in, because they weren't there to talk about what we as patients want, and what we might be expecting as participants in the data economy in the future, as opposed to just participants as patients in the healthcare industry. I think that is going to shift. We're going to see that conversation at least surface. I don't know where it'll end up, but I think we're going to start talking about it more once people understand just how much their data is now able to be remonetized. But in order to protect us, we've been cut off from the value, the downstream value.
Yeah, and it's not even the patient data itself that has value. That's important, like being able to own your data and then retrieve the value from it, but also to safeguard your data. We constantly hear about these healthcare data breaches from hospitals, insurance companies, and I feel like it just kind of gets pushed away in the news somewhere. It's not a big deal, but I think it's actually a huge deal, and it's very dangerous for these hackers to have these data sets without a permission, because it can be used for a number of purposes. I just feel like that's one of the important use cases to me, is just to be able to safeguard the data.
Well, and Ray, you touched on a great point, because that company on the West Coast is in distress, and now they're up for sale. And now one of the questions you hear in market is, once somebody buys that asset, what are they going to do with that asset where they have all the information about the people?
Mm-hmm.
If that company would be running on top of CureLedger, you would abstract the business from the compliance. So as that business gets bought and sold and evolves, the regulatory framework is community sponsored. So it's persistent to that. They may own the asset to know there's PII, and they may own the asset to know there's PHI, but they can't re-identify it without community consensus. Therefore, that scare that's in the market today wouldn't be there, right? So earlier when we were talking about what does CureLedger do, CureLedger does that. And one other piece that Nina, I know will want to add some thoughts to, is even the regulatory framework with the MiCA law that's coming out in Europe, and defining what a utility token is. And there's an appendix in there. It's a 166-page statute. Nina was kind enough to go through the whole thing and mark the pieces that I needed to go read. But what it does, it allows these data marts to be executable. A data mart and an idea is one thing. Being able to execute on that vision from a transactional commercial model that's regulatory controlled and a framework in the legal halls that we can live within, that's a powerful piece. So you can help the population by ensuring compliance and regulatory guidance is applied by the community, and secondarily, the legal framework to allow that exchange to start happening in Europe and in Asia. As we hear some things maybe evolving in the US, they have not yet, but it allows us to start those innovative models across jurisdictions. Wow, right? Living within the guardrails of what the population accepts, bringing innovation to the market. That's the game.
And what you're building is certainly foundational to making that all happen. Obviously a huge challenge, but well worth the effort. I think I know which company you're talking about. I used their services a while back, but I ended up deleting the data now because of this scare.
I'd just like to pipe in on what Dave was saying about MiCA. I think we're going to hear a lot of people talking about MiCA compliance over the next year or so. They're mostly talking about token issuance and white papers and things like that. But I've got I printed that big statute over there. I love that. I'm a nerd. I am. I'm sorry I killed a tree. But the regulation opens up a lot of market use cases. Once we get past all the how do we issue a token, we'll actually see some of the ability to create these markets that we're talking about they exist from a regulatory perspective now. It's just a matter of willpower and execution because the demand is there as well.
Speaking of tokens, let's get into that. I know the token ticker will be DSCI. Can you describe the DeSci, DSCI, CureLedger's tokenomics?
Do you mean in terms of it's a utility token. I mean, it exists to
I guess
give
from like a high, so it's a utility token. Can you talk about some of the details of how it's divided initially? How do you foresee Treasury being managed? How are people going to be incentivized to gain tokens? Will it be on multiple exchanges or not?
We're taking a staged approach to that. Number one, making sure that the token is a fully functional utility token that gives access to software that does what it says it's going to do. That's number one. That gets us past a lot of hurdles. The second then is in terms of the token economics, we're working on those right now. We don't really see that we need to do anything too far outside of the box in terms of distribution, as you said. But what's interesting about the token economics are a couple of things. Number one is that to use this token as a validator, if you're going to run a validator node, what the validators are getting access to is this growing set of exponentially increasing value in terms of data assets. Because if we've actually invented another new asset class in Web3, it is verifiable health data. That's the second one after cryptocurrency. So validators are validating the first real high quality incident of a verifiable health data pool. That increases over time, number one. But number two, we had to have a way to make sure that validators are rewarded for that. As the value of the pool goes up, so does the risk, so do the rewards. How do we deal with all of those things in more of a token economic and smart contract model? And that's in our white paper. So if folks want to read our white paper, we drill down into that. And that way, it's kind of how do we take friction like vendor contracts that we might deal with and things that we might even call governance. How do we use smart contracts to reduce the friction out of that? In terms of the simple TGE metrics, those will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But really, those are sort of inside the box.
I appreciate that. Obviously, there's a lot of stakeholders involved with potentially using CureLedger. You have patients, you have health systems, you have researchers. Is there a specific community that you're targeting in the initial phases of this launch that will benefit the most, especially as CureLedger grows? Are you building for a specific group that's going to benefit?
Well, what we have right now, right on the Rymedi side. So think of Rymedi as really the first contributor to the CureLedger protocol. So in the Rymedi verticals today, there's clinical trials running on top of Rymedi that are writing transactions. There are devices. If this was the device that was going to check if you're impaired to drive, that information is stored in there as well. Or if you're an occupational health and you want to manage your employee base, are we testing? Are they getting physical? So those three verticals exist today. They're contributing data. Now, what we found in the market, there are really innovative active pharma ingredient clinical studies that are being backed by various DAOs in market. We just signed an agreement with Good Pharma. Sav is doing some amazing work with Ravicti and other psychotropic drugs. He'll be able to fund his study by running on top of CureLedger, but he'll also be able to execute his clinical trial in Rymedi software that also writes to CureLedger. So now you have the innovative financial model and the execution. And that's where Nina touched on again, and I can't stress this enough. A large portion of the listeners have no idea what a BAA agreement is. A BAA agreement is a business authorization agreement allowing two parties to exchange information, let's call it a data set. Without that commercial agreement, you cannot do it. So saying the word data mart, saying we're doing trials, we're contributing data to protocol, without the smart contracts and the BAA contracts that are enforced by the smart contracts, you need that commercial framework to be able to do these things. And that's super exciting for us because it's more than just collecting great data. It's more than saying we're going to have a marketplace. It's the pinning of what that is to have that marketplace through. Now, some of the tokenomics pieces that Nina talked about on the incoming data, and if you remember earlier, I mentioned there's multiple modality. So that Hep C study may be worth $10 on the way in, but as you get 2 or 3, maybe that data set's worth 50. So there's a qualitative way that validators can put a value on that data set and get incentivized to go validate the data. But on the outbound, where you have an arbitrage of an aggregated data set, and that spread between puts liquidity into the marketplace that we can work through incentivization models, how it goes out. Some clinical trials in their agreement with their participants say, oh, you're going to get compensated for this. Other clinical trials don't. Those terms need to be understood so that when we go, hey, consumer side, here's your data set, you did this, here's the arbitrage and the spread, it's fulfilling that supply side and that demand side, which is a pure backbone of any free market we see out there. And it's all done with utilities. Yep.
Do the parties that are sharing data have to sign a traditional BAA and a smart contract will enforce it in a way? So both are happening. It'll be a traditional like DocuSign sort of situation and the smart contract, or will it be just the smart contract in place?
So I'm going to talk about when you are consenting in a trial, that consent language is handled by the clinical trial company or the individual. So it depends on where the consenting was done in that. Think of it very similar to a EULA agreement when you come into a new app. Okay, end user license agreement, same thing. So the data elements in the CureLedger framework have to know how that data was consented at its smallest level. That's that genesis moment that I talked about. That is step one. Then it goes into where Nina's going to answer on the commercial side on the BAA and how that works. But you have to consent anytime you're participating. You do it today. And if you walk into a doctor's office, they hand you that tablet and you go, oh, and I read through my pages and I sign at the bottom. That's consenting. Go ahead, Nina.
No, the answer is no, there isn't 2 steps. We're not adding a step, we're sublimating a couple of steps into the network. So an automated BAA, that's actually agreement between two businesses. So that's a B2B agreement. And basically we're just recording the fact that they've consented or made these representations. The representations are probably pretty standard or semi-standard in an agreement like that. But where it gets more interesting and it becomes an issue for patient data sovereignty and informed consent is and so how do we make sure that consent is actually informed? What are you entitled to be informed of as a person who's giving consent? Particularly when we de-identify our data, we're often cutting off all of our rights to participating in the fruits of that data. So how do we take existing guardrails and improve informed consent for reuse in a data marketplace? That's low-hanging fruit. There are regulatory pathways that are achievable right now. So we can execute some of those to show what a better way might look like while advocating for improvement at scale.
David, you mentioned how Rymedi will sort of be the first application, maybe DApp, you can call it, on CureLedger. What kind of other DApps or marketplaces do you envision on the CureLedger system?
Well, here's the exciting part. There's already other applications using CureLedger today. So the Rymedi model showed that it would work. So we have a clinical trial company that's running their clinical trial on it today. The continuous manufacturing pharmaceutical company that's getting launched over in Eastern Africa. That whole model and that whole regulatory batch record, as it's called in that industry, has been all laid out and designed and put through that. So we're starting to really see traction, and that's what gets exciting about the community. So we have been in contact with some DAOs. We've been in contact with some people that are doing innovative work in this space. We touched over 1 million lives. It's exciting stuff. Not a lot of modalities, but it's still exciting stuff that it's worked. And multi-jurisdictional. On the Rymedi platform, it's already in 148 languages. People don't realize that when you do a clinical trial, you have to think about ethnicities. So we have folks in Australia. Aboriginal has to show up on the list, right? It isn't just the list you see in the States. And you got to think about that by geographic positioning. geofencing the data acquisition so it becomes real world evidence, which is an FDA standard. Those are the pieces that Nina's talking to. Those companies don't have to think about those things. They exist on the protocol. I know that Rymedi submitted to the FDA for master application file, which is a regulatory standard, and all the ISO 9000 and all those other things. I know other companies that are doing clinical trials have done the same thing. So all of a sudden you start inadvertently defining what an acceptable standard is. There's nothing in writing yet, but if you see two, it's a vector. But if you see 3 or 4 companies, then you got a trend. And that's what we're working towards right now, to expand that community of people that adopt in CureLedger or the tertiary L1 innovative architecture, or maybe they want to use a module that's existing with one of the people that are already on it to accelerate their own business to generate liquidity quickly in an emerging market where they find an opportunity.
And you see CureLedger becoming sort of like this global standard of just healthcare overall. I think that, given the fact that you've considered all different jurisdictions, that's something that could happen.
Yeah. And just to be clear, in the electronic medical record space, you hear HL7 is interoperable standard. There's 3 versions of that standard. There's a litany. But medical data is a very small segment. What people don't realize, that roughly 80% of the decisions doctors make are on lab results that are done outside the EMR. And people more and more since COVID go to Doc in a Box. They want to go get their own diagnostic done, all of that. The number one use case I see is someone does a test at home and they go, oh, look, I'm pregnant. You go to your doctor, what's the first thing they do? They do the same darn test twice. If it was a digital backbone on CureLedger, they could accept it because it's admissible real world evidence. What impact and cost alone, just that simplistic example. That's what we're seeing out there today.
What I'm seeing in DeSci are people who have ideas that to them feel like audacious acts of science. So they're starting to put those projects together. You do have to filter a little signal from the noise, but that's just the way it is in innovation. Once they've been able to gather their proof points, they're going to have to operationalize their concept, put it through clinical trials, and then put it into market peer review and due diligence. And that's where, for the last 10 years, we have seen Web3 companies, be hamstrung by how hard that is. And it has always been hard. We're going to make it easier for DeSci companies because Web3 has gotten smart enough now to accelerate them.
It's fantastic.
Ray, just to add also the AI component, I think we're not using a lot of machine learning and AI models going into this Web3 DeSci trajectory. Dave has done tremendous work there as well with the data structuring and the way our system works. It's fully compatible even with complex AI and machine learning models. So yeah, I think that's also important because we are already now future forward thinking company where we are predicting what's going to happen next. We're trying to be reactive and adjust to the developments.
Yeah, absolutely. AI, I mean, every software will have a function of AI in it. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
What's interesting, Red, people are fearful of allowing AI agents to do things. The old school codex mindset on the old CDs, right? You had to have a decryption key to read the CD. Think about this. In the CureLedger protocol, every time a payload is decrypted, think of it as a codex. As that AI engine is running, you're going to know every single data element that's actually touched. Think about that. So that way, they're not just giving a data set and the AI thing goes and creates value and they're like, wait, you left us out. What if we could control what data elements are consumed within the innovation that's automated through AI agents? Now we have a multi-participant ecosystem that are all mutually incentivized for rapid innovation. That is that barrier, that perception of, oh, they're taking something from me. Now I'm a part of, and when you're a part of, it grows.
You're shining light on that potential AI agent black box you're referring to. That makes a lot of sense. I guess next question, what have been the biggest challenges leading up to the token generation event? And maybe you can share when the token generation event is planned to be.
The biggest challenge has been dealing with all the moving parts involved in bringing anything in Web3 to market, because we've got a constantly evolving regulatory landscape, although as far as, we've been doing this for years, so it's getting easier every year, actually, in a lot of ways. But moving fast enough for DeSci, because we know that the financial DeFi end of Web3 and the narrative, for want of a better term, the gaming market end of Web3 moves faster than even an AI can conduct scientific research. So striking that balance between making sure that we're participating in the market as it's growing, but also executing with integrity so that what comes out of CureLedger is actually viable in market and is helpful in terms of driving innovation sustainably. That's the hardest part. And I think I've talked to a lot of founders who have the same thing. I meet a lot of founders who have built great work, but what they don't want to do is do a pump and dump, because that devalues their work and the long-term value that they can put out into the market. So how do you manage that? That's the hardest part. I think we can do it. I think we've got a great plan.
I will say also, adopting what we've been talking about, Ray. We have a tendency. Again, I'm a software engineer and a chemist, which means I use every acronym possible. Add a little bit of DeSci in there, then it gets ridiculous. I mean, Nina's creative thinking of building out a Cure Lab engine to help people adopt. Again, people, in lieu of innovation adoption, will stick where they're comfortable. But having a Cure Lab that can help people adopt the Cure Ledger architecture, I mean, Nina's like, this is key. How do we do certain airdrop incentives to make that transition easy? Easy transition, quick value creation. I think we've had to think of some business models that I didn't think we'd have another entity out there doing that type of work. And we found quickly that it needed to be there. So understanding what you think you go into the Web3 world with, from, again, traditional enterprise life science career, to how do you not hold sacrosanct what you believe, but what the market needs, I think has been an incredibly interesting aspect of what that adoption is. And it also touched on some of the hype. You hear these hype things, and we just tell people, hey, we're going into year 7, steady Eddie. Please call our clients. Right? We've been doing what we do. And a lot of times there's some clients where I talk a lot of life science, and then we rarely talk about the DeSci piece until they're ready to understand what it is. Other clients love the DeSci narrative, but they may not know the life science narrative. So Nina and I balance incredibly well the ability for them to want to ask, and then to help educate how that would work seamlessly together, and even help them figure out, if I'm selling a diagnostic test, great, I'm in the diagnostic business. But hey, diagnostic manufacturer, if you put a digital wrapper, now you have an ecosystem solution where you can sell more of these. And her head goes poof. And then I go, what do you do in globalization? I don't know. Poof. All of a sudden, we have innovative revenue models that our client base didn't even think about yet that we can introduce. And I think that education process needs to be slow and methodic in the way we do it, so they can consume a complex narrative that we try to distill down to simplicity.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out DeSci and separate the noise.
I don't think we answered the question, but we're planning a major announcement around the week of ETH Denver. So just stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned, folks. ETH Denver.
Yeah.
And we just want to mention the education piece is super critical, and I could imagine sponsored hackathons by CureLedger or Cure Labs to kind of get people moving and thinking, and really help them hold their hands, essentially, because this is quite new stuff. It's very innovative, and people will need to learn it. So it's going to take some time. But as we've seen in Web3, things happen actually pretty quickly. So yeah.
Right, but with that is also coming opportunity. What I see there, I think we can try to think a little bit outside of the box as being also pioneers in the DeSci space. So just not saying we'll do it right away, but I in one of my ideas like to grow, because this X Infinity and similar other kind of projects we're having community based, right? Like once the community was blowing off, it was driving forward also the project, growing it to unprecedented kind of valuation and stuff, right? So we can become also we use this problem as an opportunity for us and use the AI to educate our communities, right? So we can come up with different type of movies, kind of educational content. So there I see also a big opportunity where there's a market gap, and I think the market is ready to absorb that as well. If we plan smartly also our marketing and community outreach efforts, I think we're having a sweet spot basically that we can hit and showcase Dave, Nina as experts in the DeSci healthcare industry basically, and to educate and inspire actually youth, and that's an opportunity for us actually.
Yeah, very exciting opportunities. And I think what you guys are doing is super important. And I just want to, again, I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to come on this podcast. One thing about Health Unchained, it's about healthcare data, blockchain, AI, all these innovative technologies, but it's also about how do you personally stay healthy and keep yourself fit and keep health top of mind. So I want to ask each of you, what's one way you're each staying healthy today?
All right. Well, I'll go first. Ray, I know you're familiar that I've been a kickboxer for a lot of years, so we still keep a heavy bag out on the porch. I invite people to come have brisket on the porch. They always see the heavy bag and think, "What's that for?" I'm like, "Contract negotiations and code that won't compile." So I think you gotta clear your mind and be centered in what you're doing. And lots of times, strenuous exercise does that. And those days when you're like, "Oh my gosh, this isn't going to work," I always remember the story of the young lady I met when I was in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, making a difference. And she didn't speak English, but I'm a dad and I can speak universal child. I'm worried what's going on. And that look in that child's eye keeps you going in the morning. And you only think about those moments when you've exerted all the intellectual noise in your head and you go swing a little bit. So if anybody wants to come out to the porch and hit the heavy bag, I'm happy to hold some mitts. So that's what I do. Nina.
Awesome. I might take that offer up on you, David, at one point. I
Yep.
think that'd be awesome. Trip to
Yeah,
South Carolina. Why not?
100%. Nina.
I get up early. I walk every day, and I love hot yoga, although I'm sort of out of the groove of it.
Well, hopefully you're inspired today to, sign up for a next class. Thanks for sharing that.
Suren, what do you got?
Yeah, so in my case, cycling, guys. So as you know, in Denmark is the experience of cyclists and stuff. So I'm God knows. I mean, sometimes with some applications, there are tremendous numbers. Like maybe I've cycled with some trackers like 300 kilometers plus or something, some tremendous numbers. And then I like walking, just like Nina, and kind of, I don't know. Sometimes when I wanna bit. I was playing chess since I was a kid, right? I think it's also about both mental and the physical health that you can balance. So sometimes like just distressing and playing chess helps me just to stay more concentrated and kind of think a bit more strategic. So just kind of trying to combine some multidisciplinary things to stay healthy. Thank you.
Yeah, Surin, we should, I don't know if you play chess, we can maybe I'll get your username and we can play online.
Oh wow, sure, man.
Um,
Great pleasure.
I want to thank you all again for taking the time out. Again, anyone listening to the podcast, please follow Health Unchained on Twitter and LinkedIn and sign up. And if you're interested, register for Supercast premium content as well. It's well worth it. And how can people follow you? What should their next step be?
From the marketing side, I think they need to follow our Twitter handles more like a Web3, because we're about to announce major Web3 developments in our companies. So the Rymedi's Twitter is Team Rymedi, the handle. The handle for CureLedger is CureLedger itself. So then we have CureLedger Telegram channel as well. So I think those channels will be the main sources for our community to follow our developments. And as Nina and Dave mentioned, stay tuned. We have something really cool prepared for ETH Denver for February 24 event. So yeah, something exciting coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the ETH Denver event. And this video will be up very soon on Supercast and eventually get published on the public Health Unchained channel. Again, thanks again. We hope today's conversation inspired you to think critically about the future of health innovation and the role we can all play in building systems that prioritize trust, transparency, and efficiency. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review to help us reach more passionate listeners about revolutionizing healthcare. Until next time, stay healthy, stay innovative, and keep your mind and ideas unchained. Thanks again, all.
Hey everyone, we would greatly appreciate it if you can take a moment to share your thoughts about the show by writing a review and rating the show on your podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach a wider audience and enhance the overall quality of the show. Don't forget to encourage your friends, mentors, teams, and students to tune in and subscribe as well. Thank you for your support. Check out healthunchained.org and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you enjoy podcasts. Join the premium Health Unchained Supercast community by going to healthunchained.supercast.com, which gets you access to ad-free episodes, and join the official Telegram community group for the latest updates.